Hello friends. So in the last lecture we saw that we had created a login screen like this, and if you put some like something here and then click on this, then we just put a alert message, do authentication. We did not put any real functionality. So in this lecture we are going to create a service on the Angular side. We'll create a service and that service will make the call to the Spring Boot REST service for the authentication. Okay, so let me go to the Angular IDE here and then we'll change this thing with the actual code. So let me first create a service that will do the authentication, like that will call the Spring Boot REST service. So on Angular side, you want to create a service, and I'm going to create a folder called core, and I'll put all the common services, the core services in this folder, and any service which is specific to any particular functionality that will go in the respective module itself. Okay. So this we got here. So I want to create a service there. So what I'll do, if I go here, source app, and we just created a core folder. Okay, so here I want to create a service ng generate service. I want to give it a name authentication service. So I'm just saying auth. Okay, so let's enter. So now it will create the skeleton file. So it creates auth service.typescript. That's our main service, and this is the corresponding file for the testing purpose. Let's go here and see in the core. We got two files, one for testing, one the main file. Open it, and we'll see this is our auth service that has been created. And like you can see, we gave the name as auth, but when you create a service, this Angular CLI, it appends a service at the end here, right? So it becomes auth service. So we'll write our code here, but we'll also need, if you want to make use of this service anywhere else in this module, then we also need to specify that in the corresponding app module, right? Or the corresponding module file, right? So for this location, the corresponding module file is app module.ts. We'll go here, and then we want to specify, we have to specify it here under the providers. Any service that you create and you want to access it anywhere else in the module, you need to specify that in the respective module file. So we have imported here and we specified under providers. Now this can be used anywhere, so we can use it in our login component now. Now before that, let me write some code here in the auth service. Now what we want to do is that we just want to make a call to the Spring Boot REST service, and for that we just need the Spring Boot for that particular REST service. We just need the REST endpoint URL so that we can make a call. Okay, so it will be like something like this. So constructor, in the constructor we need to specify this HTTP client, because this is the library or the class that we are going to use. We'll come to this, and then this is a constructor. What else you want to do? After that, we want to write a method called login or authentication or whatever, right? So I'm just writing a login method. And what it takes a login payload that will pass. This login payload will contain username, password, and a domain. And then this is the return type. It's observable, which means that it will be a reactive programming here. So it's observable, which means that once we get the response back, uh, the code will be on this object. The code will be asynchronously executed, right? I'll explain that more when we write the code for the handling of the response. Okay, and this is the response object. So I'll create uh, a class for this API response. In this, we want to hold the result back, which comes from the server. So we'll use a uniform response, right? For any response that comes from the server, from any of the services on the Spring Boot side, we will wrap that response in an API response object, and that will always have status, message, and the actual payload or the actual object. Okay, we'll create this thing, and then we are writing here a console.log so we can see for the debugging, executing auth service and this login method, and we just call this thing. So this is our Spring Boot service endpoint URL. That's the service we want to invoke here. We want to do HTTP post, right? Because we are going to pass this login payload, and this is the URL HTTP localhost 80, and then user service. That's the base URL, and then this token generate token. Okay, so there should be some service which matches this endpoint URL that will be called on the server side. Okay, so now we'll need to fix few things here. First thing is that we need to fix this HTTP client, and then we'll create a API response as well. Okay, so let me start working fixing on HTTP client thing first. Okay, so let me import the library for HTTP client. So we can use this. Okay, basically we'll need these three to fix these problems here. So if we import, save it, injectable is already here. HTTP client we have got, and then this observable. Okay, now we have got all these things fixed. Now we just one problem, API response. So API response, like I said, I want to just use a class to get the response from the Spring Boot service wrapped into this always. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll create a model here under the app. I'll create a folder called model where I will put some like classes, any Pojo classes here, which will be used like common ones, right? Any specific model will go to the respective module. Okay, so this is a model here, and here I want to create API response.ts. Okay, and in this file I simply want to, it's a class basically, so I'll just put this thing, save it, and API response still not able to find because we need to. Okay, so now we have fixed this, we got all the dependencies resolved here. So what it is doing, it is like in the constructor we are passing this HTTP client. It's a like we are providing a dependency, we are injecting a dependency basically, and then you can use this HTTP client object to make the APIs of this HTTP client, right? So that's how we are using this HTTP post, and this is the Spring Boot REST service endpoint URL, and we are passing this login payload. In the login payload, we'll send user, password, and domain. Okay, and then it sends back a response, right? And this method sends a observable of the API response, so you can asynchronously work on this response. Okay, so I think that's this service is good now. The next thing is that I want to call this service from our login component, right? When you do the click on that button, the login button, showing some error because we are still in the middle of this functionality. So here what I want to do, let's say this is console.log. So instead of popping up the message, it will simply print on the console. so we can debug that. And then here what I want to do, I want to access that service, this auth service. So before we can access it, we will need to specify here okay. We got this service here. Now we got to use this. So what I'll do here, I want to call this service auth service dot, and which method is that? We have login. We'll need to access it using this dot auth service dot login, and then we need to pass a login payload object, right? And that object, like I said, we need to pass something like this thing. We'll create a login payload here. This is login payload that we are creating from the form fields, right? So the login form controls username value, password value, and domain value. Domain here we are doing the hard coded, so that's okay. But user and password will come from the screen, right? So that's how we are creating the login payload, and then we'll pass this in this method, right? So that's how we call the service. But then the response of this method of login method was a observable, right? So that means that uh, you can access it asynchronously, right? It's a reactive programming, and so what we'll do, we'll access it like something like this. You, for the observable object, you need to subscribe. If you don't subscribe, you would, this call will not actually happen. You will not get any result back until you subscribe. So you'll subscribe. So we're going to subscribe to this, and this is a skeleton method here I'm taking, like this, subscribe. And then if there is any data, if you get any response back, then this code will be executed, this data section. And if you see any error while calling that method, then this method will be executed, this part will be executed. Okay, so what we are doing here, if we are calling the method auth service login, we are sending this payload, and then we are subscribing to the response because it is observable. That's how we make the asynchronous call using the HTTP client in the Angular. If any data comes back, then this code will be executed. And here, first thing I want to check that data.status, and this data is what is the API response, right? Because that's what we are returning from there. This data is of type API response because that is what we were returning. If you see here, so we were returning observable of API response, right? So API response, so which means that when we get the response back, it will be of type API response, right? So data and API response has the status, right? So API response, if you see here, it has status, message, and result. Status, message, and then result has the actual value which comes. That's how we are wrapping the response from the from the springboot service, right? So, and same way we'll send, like before sending from springboot, we'll also see that we will create this object like this. We'll put a status code, some message, and then the actual object that we want to send back. Okay, so login component here, sorry, in the login component, that's how we are subscribing. And then first thing we're checking if data dot status 200, which means everything went fine, we got the response back successfully. Then we'll do something here. Okay, but for the time being I can just write console.log. I can say response received successfully, user authenticated. And if sometimes what happens that we were able to make, let's say we were able to make the call to the server, on the server side something happened, right? And because of that the response was not 200, but it sends something else. For example, database is not accessible on the server, and then it sends you some response that something is bad on the server side. So it could not do the actual authentication, but still you were able to access the server, right? So in that case status could be something else. You were able to make the call to the server, but it could not execute the required functionality, right? So because of that it sent some other response code. So in that case, because it could not do the actual authentication, then we can say like maybe some server error, something happened on the server side. Okay, and this data section is executed when we get some data response back, right? We made the call to server and we got something back, and this section executes when we are not even able to make the call to the server. Something happened, some problem happened on the client side itself. So I can say some, maybe I can say client error. Okay, so for example, the server service endpoint URL is wrong. So in that case, it won't be even able to access the server. Something is wrong on the client side itself. You have the wrong URL of the service, right? So then this code will be executed. So I'm just writing some like basic debugging messages, and then later we'll fill it completely. Okay, so that's what we have done so far. And so instead of earlier in the submit we were just showing the message, now we are getting the values from the form. We're creating an object of login payload with login username, password, and domain, and then we are calling the auth service, and we're passing this on, and then we are waiting for the result, right? So this is asynchronous. So any code which is written after here, something, if you write something here, that will be executed. This code will be executed irrespective of how much time this method takes, right? So that's the asynchronous call we are making. Okay, and then once the response is available, then and status is 200, then this code executes, which means everything went fine, user was authenticated. So whatever, wherever you want to route the user to, we can make that routing code here. We'll just write after this. And if its status was not 200, then something went wrong, then maybe you can route him to some other page. And here where the Angular was not even able to access to the server because something, maybe the URL is wrong or something, then it's a client error, right? So client error currently we are saying, and then we can again maybe route him to the login page itself. Okay, so what will happen now, let's see. So what should happen is that currently what will happen, if we provide the user and password from the screen, it will execute this thing. It will go to the auth service login, and then there in the login here, it will try to access this endpoint URL. But in my machine, on my machine, I don't have this thing ready yet. I don't have anything executed on the port 80. So basically it will fail, right? It won't be able to find anything here, so it will fail. And because of that, this, we won't go here, we come here. So it will show on the console client error. Okay, so all good. And see now what happens, user service. Okay, so this is our front page. If I click on the login, there is some problem here. And what's the problem? If you press the F12 for debugging, no provider for HTTP client. So we need to specify the HTTP client also. Okay. Okay, so we're seeing this problem here that HTTP auth service HTTP client. No provider for HTTP client. Okay, we need, so let's see here. Have we imported HTTP client module? If I go to the app module, we don't have HTTP module, so we need to also import HTTP client module from the Angular common HTTP. Okay, so now we have imported this and it should be able to access it now. Let's go back and see the browser. Okay, so we are here now. Let me start it again. And we are using user service as the base URL to access it. So we just here and we click on the login and now we get the login page. But now if I try to access with some username and password, and then it will go to the, like I explained already, it will go to the login component TS on submit method. Here, this is the on submit method. It will come here, it will print this thing, and then it will create the login payload with the username and password that is entered in the form. And then it will call this auth service login with this payload, and then it will go to the auth service login here with that payload. It will come here, and here it will print this message. But after that, when it will try to access this, like to do this post method for this service endpoint URL, it won't be able to access it because I don't have anything running on port 80 on my machine. I haven't set up my Spring Boot service yet. It will fail at this point, and then because it is fails, so here it will fail, so it doesn't get any data. It will go in this error section and it will simply print this client error. Okay, and this section is asynchronous, so it will not even wait for this code to be executed. This will automatically be executed, right? So it can execute before this section itself if it takes more time. So let's see what happens. Let me click in here and nothing happens because I haven't put any routing in case of failure. But let's see what happened to the, like in the debugging mode F12, and then you can see here what's happening here. I think call HTTP localhost 80 user service 2. So this is executing auth service login, right? This one, and this code is here in our service, right? So this thing, it executed this part, executing this, and you see this end part, it got executed before in the login component. This end part got executed because it is asynchronous, so it got executed before. And then after that, like I said, because it did not get any data, because it was not even able to access the that service endpoint, and it got some error, so it will execute this error part. So it is printing error here. Okay, so this is a skeleton, like we just put the placeholders, but we'll fill it with the actual details. Okay, we'll put here where we want to route this request to, right? So in case if it is successful, then I want to route it to some page, right? And if there's some problem on the server, it's saying, right, it's not 200. Okay, 200 is okay, HTTP status okay, 200. But if there's anything other than this 200, then we can display this thing on the login page itself. Maybe here we can set up our error message, right? So this message, right, now we can set up this thing, this error message. We can say at this point here, we can say that we can access it like this. this is error message, and we can say something went wrong while, or maybe you can simply say server not available. Simply saying this thing, or some server error, something like that, right? Maybe server error, try again. Okay, like this. And here also we can say almost maybe something like this, but here I can say client error, try maybe. Sorry, so in this case it was not able to access the server, so you can say server error here, server error, try again. And here it was able to access the server, but something went wrong there, right? So we can write something went wrong server. It was able to access, but there's some problem, it was not able to authenticate maybe, but server has sent some response but with a status code which is not 200, right? So try again, something like this thing. Okay, and now we can specify like this error portion. Let's see here, we already have this error message somewhere. Error message, yeah, we are showing it here, ngf invalid login. Okay, so we are showing this error message with invalid login, right? So we can also say here then that in these cases we'll also say, just to set this thing, this dot, just to make that section displayed, right? So that's why I'm writing this code, although there's no problem with the login. But so here, if something like maybe this code can also be executed, right? So on the server side, if the user is authenticated, we'll send a response back with status 200. But if the user is not authenticated correctly, right, something is wrong with user password or something, user not found or password is wrong or something, then we can send some other message, some other status code, right? And then accordingly we can print here that thing, right? Invalid user or something like that. Or we can also send that message, right? Whatever message we are getting, right, from this data to status, then from here itself we can get data dot message. Some message will come from the server, we'll just display that message. So if the user is not authenticated or some problem with the database, then we'll get that message from the server. We simply show it here. In this case, it was not even able to access the server, so we can see server error, try again. The server could not be accessed, try again. Okay, like this. Let's see now. Try login. We put some value here. And we entered, and we are going to see the logs here. Okay, so we can see here that same thing, right? And but here server could not be accessed, try again. Now we can see this message here, right? So now in this case, when the user authentication has been successfully done and we get a response with the state of with the status of 200, then we simply want to say that okay, everything is fine, let's route the user to the home page, right? So for that, what we'll do, we'll just say we'll use this router. You can see we are using a router here, Angular, from the Angular router library, this router. And before we can use it, we need it to be specified in our constructor. We are setting the dependency here, and now we can use it. So here I'm just simply saying this router navigate to this path. So then we need to specify this path also, and we haven't created the home page component yet. So now what is saying that I want to go to this path. So this path should be specified in our app routing module. So here we have so far these ones. Similarly, we'll need one for the home. So for this path, now whatever component you want to route it to, you can specify that component here. Okay, so we haven't created the home page component yet. Let me create that quickly, and then I'll come back and change it to the home component. Okay, so home component also we just want to create here itself. So here in the CLI, I'll go to the root of the Angular project here, and here I want to create the component home. And for the time being, we'll just say one hello or welcome message there, and we're not going to customize the whole page, but you just want to show that that's how the login flow will work. It's creating the skeleton files, and it has been created now. So if we go here, you can see the home component has been created. This is the HTML, and we can say here, let's say welcome to the user management service. Okay, and this is the corresponding TypeScript file where we can put any logic, anything which if you want to do, which we will do later. And this is the corresponding app home. If you want to use it directly, this HTML. If you want to use on some other HTML, you can use this. And this is the home component. Okay, that's what we need in our app routing module. If you go here, we just want to say that okay, if the path is this, somebody wants to go to this path, then load this home component. Okay, so all set up now. So we'll see now if the user is successfully authenticated, which means that if the status code is 200 while doing the login in the login component here, right? So if when we do the login, provide the user and password, and if on the server side everything is good, authenticated, and data status is 200, then we are saying that okay, route him to the home page. Otherwise, if there's any problem, right, invalid username, password, or any other problem on the server side, will simply show the message whatever is coming from server. And if there is some problem, we're not even able to access the server URL, right, then we can simply, we are just printing some message here and showing the login screen itself. Okay, so that's fine. Now let's go to the browser just to see everything is good. So we go here, and if you go click login, and we enter username and password, and I click on this, because last time, like we saw, the server is still not available, so we are seeing server could not be accessed still, right, because server, that URL is still not working for the REST endpoint. So if you want to get this working, if you want to go to the home page, then we have to send, somehow we have to get the response from server and get a status code of 200. Okay, so for that, what we'll do, we will, in the next lecture we are going to create the Spring Boot REST service with that endpoint URL, so that when we make, when this code is hit and when it tries to call this, it authenticates on the server, the username and password, and then if everything is good, it will send a response back with status 200, and maybe it will send some other information about user, the roles or something. Okay, so that's the end of this session, and in the next lecture we will start working on the Spring Boot side. Okay, thanks for joining this session and see you shortly.